Hey everyone, welcome to the Shrink Think podcast. We are starting a new series here. I'm not sure exactly how often we'll get into this, but we'll try to kind of hit these back to back to back because ultimately, really, this could be probably its own podcast. And I know
there is one actually, I think.
Yeah, there are. I mean, there are podcasts out there on this very subject. That's the only thing that they do. And so it would be really easy to spend 10, 15, 20
months,
years, episodes just covering the Enneagram. And I know whenever I say that, people are like, the what? Like, what is that? It's like performing for the camera here. Child at heart. The Enneagram, it's Enneagram, and it's describing the shape. It's like the circle with 9 points around it. And the points connect with certain other points on across from it or whatever. Ultimately creating this like diagram that describes 9 different personality types with each one with its own specific motivation and fear. And so before we get into like how that actually works, I want to just explain a little bit more about the Enneagram in terms of like, well, how is it, like, what is it? How is it different from other like personality tests or personality surveys or whatever you want to call them, assessments. Essentially, the way I like to describe it is when you think about like the Myers-Briggs, the MBTI, Myers-Briggs type indicator, for example, out there, that one operates off of the big 5 personality, characteristic. Thank you. That's the word. And I can't remember what they are off the top of my head. I know my son Daniel knows them. He's a nerd about that. He knows all of it. Actually, I've learned a lot from him just having conversation with him. But it's the big 5, and those are pretty well researched, and they're great. But I look at the Myers-Briggs as being the what of your personality. It's very concrete. It's static in that sense. And so these are the things that if you've ever heard of the Myers-Briggs, people would say like, oh yeah, what are your letters? You're like, I'm in
ENTP.
Yeah, ISFJ or
ENFJ.
ENFP.
ENFP is the big one in counselor world.
ACDC. No, that's not one of them. But it's like, what are all these letters? You know, they're essentially referring to like some introversion, extroversion, I versus E on one side of it. On the back end, you're talking about judging versus perceiving. That's another piece of it. And then on the middle, you've got these observer functions, like how do you observe information? Do you observe based on looking at patterns or based on gathering sensory information? That's going to be your N or your I, intuition versus or sensing. And then also your decider function, like how do you make decisions? Is it based on feeling, like how you feel, or is it based on logic and rationality, which is the T, thinking? So that's how you get like the INFJ kind of a thing. So anyway, the Myers-Briggs, that's the what of personality. It's interesting. It's great stuff out there. I've always enjoyed taking that. And in case you're wondering, I am an I go back and forth between F and T, but ENFJ is probably where I usually land.
I am an ENFP or an ENTP, depending on if I use toilet paper.
Going to the bathroom.
Right.
I'm much more of a thinker there.
Yeah,
that's probably
that's
true.
where the thinking happens.
So that's the Myers-Briggs. Okay, the Enneagram. That's what this episode is about. The Enneagram, on the other hand, though, is about, it's the why of personality, which to me as a psychotherapist is fascinating because I want to understand, why are you doing what you're doing? Why, you know, when you say this or you do this or you didn't do this, where's that coming from? What made you think that way or choose those things? What are those motivations on the one side, or what are the fears that are driving you on the other side? So that's what the Enneagram is. It's looking at essentially each personality type has different motivations and fears behind why they do what they do, which is interesting because if you were to look at some of the personality types of the Enneagram, you might resonate with 1 or 2 of the numbers, maybe even a few of the numbers behaviorally, But if those motivations and fears are not the reason why you do something, that's not your number.
Right. And one of the things I like about this that I'll tell people is, here's the deal, that there's a lot of people online that have done a lot of research on the Enneagram, which is honestly, it is different than the Myers-Briggs and Smithers personality stuff.
And I think just when you say research, I've heard people say, it's not scientifically based or whatever, like, okay, fine, it might not be, but I've used it and I've talked with people about it. It's very, very helpful. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is how it can be helpful for you.
Right, exactly. So that's the thing is, there is an argument out there in Enneagram land that do you have to actually take an Enneagram assessment, or can you just look at your number and be like, that's my number? And like, we're not going to get into all that, but part of the reason why I'm bringing it up is that there are so many people that have opined on this, put out websites, put stuff together, that when you get into this a little bit, you could be like, okay, my partner is a 4 and I'm a 1. So what are the common problems between a 1 and a 4? And there's a lot of stuff out there. I mean, the other thing that's cool is like, there are websites that say what it's like when you are healthy, what it's like when you're average, what it's like when you're unhealthy. And so you can look at those and go, wow, you can kind of track where you're at, and other people can track where that's at. And it's what I've also said to people in light of that is, look, if you were to marry or couple with another 4, you are going to be dealing with these same types of things. It's not like this person you married or whatever is they just keep doing blah 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 and you hate it. It's like, well, some of that is natural to a 4, and some of that could be the way the unhealthy 4 works, but it kind of works to bring a little bit more distance and depersonalization to the whole situation, because you'd be like, okay, some of this is just wired in.
Yeah. So speaking of Enneagram, and you're like putting into the application, before we kind of dive into that, we'll get there in just a second. This can be a really helpful tool. I use it as a consultant with my consulting clients in their businesses and understanding themselves. So if you're a business owner, or even if you're an employee, or if you're just a worker of some kind, you can know yourself and how you tend to operate, like what works for you, what doesn't work for you, some of the struggles you have. That's great just for your own self-awareness of like, oh, I need things to be this way, or when this happens, I really struggle with that as a personality type. And it doesn't mean that you're pinned down. It just is giving you a description of like, this is how I tend to be. And then, as you said before, there are some movements that you can make toward health, or when you're more in stress, if you're more unhealthy, these are what your behaviors are going to look like. So it just can give you a whole lot more like awareness about what's going on. So anyway, this can help you if you're a business owner. It also can help you if you're managing people. So I do this a lot, again, with my consulting clients, group practice owners, people that are managing or working with a lot of different people. Even with some of my clients that have bosses, coworkers, I'll ask them, do you know the Enneagram? Do you know what number these people are? Because essentially, like you said, it can give you some awareness and some distance from it. Instead of being like, Jane is so frustrating, why does she always blah? It's like when you know the Enneagram, it's like, oh, if she's a 4, for example, we're sort of picking on, let's pick another one. If she's a 6 and she's just always solving problems, then it's like, oh, this is what happened. She looks at things and she sort of identifies some of the worst case scenario. And then she says, here's what we need to do in order to solve that problem. And instead of being like, she's so negative, she's so fearful, actually, we can see it as, no, actually, she's looking for problems so that she can solve them, so that we're not going to struggle with those things, or so that they don't become problems, for example. That can, excuse me, that can give you a lot of awareness in terms of working with people, so that you're not taking things personally. And it can help you find an avenue for working with people that's much more effective than just seeing something and then reacting to it, because you can sort of put it into a category of sorts and then say, oh, these are some of the tendencies that this person has. So once you get into the Enneagram and you have some idea of what each of these numbers are, and like you said before, you can go really deep. You can plunge to the depths of it, in terms of like each number goes somewhere in health and somewhere in stress, and meaning it'll look this way in health and your number will look that way in stress. And you can also go into like each number has a wing, or each number has a subtype, which I'll talk about in just a second. You can plunge to the depths of that, and then it'll give you a lot of helpful guidance when you're dealing with people. So if you have a general idea of what these numbers are, like I do, I would say I've read quite a bit, studied quite a bit, worked with people a lot. It has immensely helped me navigate my relationships with people. And people would say, I feel really seen and known, which is already kind of a natural thing for me. But I think they feel like I get them because I have an understanding on the surface of who they might be, but I'm always there to like sort of check with them. Like, is this who you are? Is this how you struggle? And they're like, oh yeah, that is me. And then we can put that in front of us and work together well.
Yeah, I think so I took this the Enneagram actually in grad school. Man, like at this point, probably 22 years ago. My reason for bringing it up is it was kind of considered old then. I don't know when the heck the thing was developed, but the impression I got from the professor was like, okay, this is one of those things out there. It's been there for a while. Do you happen to know when it started?
Yeah, I remember there's a kind of the intro book on it called The Road Back to You by Ian Crone, I think is his name. And I think it says it's like it has been around for a really long time, hundreds, if not like thousands of years, the concept of it.
Good Lord.
But it like became more popular more recently. I mean, obviously, like with the whole, psychology movement, from like the 60s and 70s. I want to say it sort of picked up steam more around then.
Yeah, I think how it's been helpful to me as a therapist, because I don't know as much about it as you do, but I've gotten sucked in, and it is true. Like I'll kind of like figure out this person's number just by talking with them, and then I start imagining things for them. They'll be like, yes, that's totally right. It just takes it a little bit of a layer deeper. I mean, I believe that I was doing fine before, but it is one of those things where it's like, oh, you can get a lot more specific, even though granted it's surface, but you can get a lot more specific quicker. The other thing that's interesting about this, because they have these things called triads, which I don't really understand yet, but they are stuff like, for example, my wife is for sure like in the body triad, right? So it feels to me like, as I understand it, that the way that she feels or experiences life is with her body, right? And so she might not even know that she's anxious until it floods her mind to be like, okay, that's it. Like we were driving down the road. She won't listen to this anyway. We're driving down the road, and I'm to where I'm tuned into her at this point, and the radio will be like on commercials or something, and I'll start getting a vibe of like, oh, she's getting anxious. I'll just feel it, and all of a sudden she'll be like, what's going on? She turns the radio off because she just doesn't like the static type of a thing, but it doesn't occur to her until like all of a sudden. Anyway, you were gonna say.
Yeah, so I'll jump into triads a little bit, and then I'll tell you about the numbers. This is just kind of an overview. My hope is that as we unpack this more, you guys will want to get interested in it and know yourself better, and know your friends, your family members, even your children. They say not to type your children, but if you have older children, then it can be really helpful for those relationships. So just getting started, you've got this circle with all these 9 numbers around it, and think of them in clusters of 3. So these triads, tri is 3, right? So there are 3 triads of numbers, 3 clusters of numbers, and one of them at the top is the body triad or the gut triad, and those are the numbers 8, 9, 1. Now, just so you know, this is going to go all the way around. It's going to go 8, 9, and then start over at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then right to complete the circle is your 8 and 9. So in the body triad, you've got 8, 9, 1, and that means essentially that these people are really in tune with their body. That their body, is essentially like the strongest indicator of how they're experiencing the world, or the strongest sensory kind of a thing that they get from experiencing the world. Typically, they are more disconnected from their emotions as well. They can still be thinkers, strong thinkers, and aware of the thoughts, but they're primarily going to be tuned into their body. So when their body is doing something, that's an indication that they're feeling something. They don't necessarily know that, but that's how the body works. And emotions manifest themselves in the body, and that's what they experience primarily, right, is the body. So your 8, think about it this way, just as a brief overview of these numbers. The body is triad is also like the thing that they struggle with is anger. And each one of the triads has something that they struggle with. The body triad is anger, the heart triad is shame, and then the head triad is fear. And so we'll get into that in just a second. So if you think about the 8-9-1, the 8 is angry outwardly, the 1 is angry inwardly at themselves for not living up to their own standards, and then the 9 in the middle doesn't know that they're angry. And so this is like the 9 is like their peacemaker, I think is what it's called. And it's somebody who is like, they go along to get along, everything's fine until it's not.
Well, they're
right?
like amicable, right?
They're very amicable, right? Because they want harmony, they want peace in their relationships. Oftentimes they can be a middle child, right? Where it's like, hey, I just want everybody to get along. And so they'll just be like, yeah, sure, I'm okay with that. Sure, that's fine, that's fine. And then at one point they're like, why do you always blank? It's like, whoa, I thought you were okay with this. Well, I was until I wasn't, right? So that's your 9. If we move on to the heart triad, we're going clockwise around the circle. You've got the heart triad. So the 2, 3, 4 is the heart triad. And these people essentially are like big feelers. So the thing that they primarily experience the world through is their feelings. And they might be less connected to their bodies. They might still be connected to their thoughts as well. Meaning they're not as connected to their bodies, meaning maybe they're not aware of what their body is doing. Unless you ask them, then they're like, oh yeah, I guess I do have a pit in my stomach. I wasn't even aware of that, right? So your 2 is going to be like generally like your helper, somebody that really, like there are a lot of nurses that are 2s, people that are caretakers. Your 3 is like your achiever, performer. And then your 4 is, oftentimes these are like artists or people that are really creative types, because they can be really deep feelers and really abstract about things. But as I said before, in this triad, the thing that they struggle with the most is shame, and feeling like their worth is in what they do. And so whether it's helping, or whether it's expressing something creatively, or whether it's in doing something, performing, achieving success, these people are going to struggle a lot with shame. That's going to be one of their big like fears. And then moving lastly to the head triad, you've got numbers 5, 6, and 7 to round out those 3, right? And then it circles back around to the 8 on top. So the 5, 6, 7 is the head triad, meaning these people are generally the most connected to their thoughts. And that's how they kind of experience the world, is by thinking stuff. And often they are very disconnected from their emotions as well, similarly in some ways to the body triad. Your 5 is somebody who generally likes to know stuff. They protect themselves well. And I mentioned before that in this triad, fear is like the big thing. These people don't want to experience fear, or when a bad feeling comes up, they're like, I want to get away from it. I'm going to do whatever I need to do to kind of get that thing away from me because of some sense of fear. And so for the 5, their fear is being unprepared. I don't want to be unprepared, so I'm going to know all of the things about all of the things.
And one more thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And one more thing.
They can just accumulate knowledge like crazy. It's pretty incredible. And then you've got your 6, which is called a loyalist, meaning they're usually very, very loyal in relationships.
I've always heard them called also the skeptic.
They also can be a skeptic, yeah, because they're looking at things and looking again, like for like what is the worst case scenario, or where can things go wrong, so that they can get ahead of that and anticipate it and solve that problem. And then the 7 is I'm trying to think.
I feel like they're the fun guy.
Yeah, the fun guy. Yeah, I was gonna say like a playboy. I mean, it can be that way as well. But they're usually like the life of the party. They're usually somebody who enjoys having fun. They enjoy novelty, doing new things.
They don't like being bored.
They don't like being bored at all. That's terrible for them. Or they don't like negative emotions. Wherever there's like some negative emotion, they'll usually just try to like tune it out or go another direction. So overall, you've got these 3 triads that kind of define different personalities and how they do things, some of the reasons why, but we can unpack that more in future episodes. But right now, we just wanted to give you an idea that there's this Enneagram out there. And if any of this sounds like you, I want to encourage you to keep listening, because we'll unpack this. And I want you to explore more, because you can understand a lot when you know your number and why you do the things that you do.
Yeah, one of the things too that is, I wondered if we probably could give some people some helpful places to go. I mean, unfortunately, it'd be great if we were getting sponsored by some of these places. Sponsor us.
Yeah, I do. I would say, I mean, the Enneagram Institute website is a great resource library. They've got a test there that you can take, and then tons of articles that you can read there. There are Enneagram books out there. I mentioned The Road Back to You is a great one. That's a really good starter that gives you an overview of each number.
I like truity.com. It's TRUITY. I feel like it's really well organized. It's easy to click around on it, and it gives a pretty comprehensive summary to get you kind of like started, and you can deep dive, as like we said. I mean, we are having to stop ourselves right now because we haven't even told you the individual numbers.
Not at all. No. I mean, and like I mentioned before, each number can have a wing, meaning like if you're a 1, you can have like your secondary number that you've got strong characteristics can be like the number on either side of it. And so that it's a certain flavor of each number. And then there's a book out there by Beatrice Chestnut that also goes into subtypes. That's another great resource if you wanted to get into those, where you can read a lot more in depth about how each number comes to whatever that they come through and how they can overcome some of their struggles. So we'll dig into that a lot more as time goes on, but thanks for hearing about this. And again, we just want to help you in your relationships and know yourself and be on your path towards healing and towards growth. Thanks for listening.
Have a great day, everyone. We're flying out.